The senator from Mississippi.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir. I rise again to continue my discussion about the case for a bigger Navy, a bigger fleet, and to endorse the requirement of the experts in the Department of Defense that we move to a 355-ship Navy. You know, when a crisis strikes around the world, the president asks his national security team, where are the carriers? Where are the aircraft carriers? Each of our carriers is a 100,000-ton giant accompanied by an entire carrier group consisting of mighty warships and aircraft. They represent, the carrier itself represents 4.5 acres of sovereign U.S. territory. In early January of this year, and members don't know this, Mr. President, a strange and profoundly disturbing thing happened. The Commander-in-Chief's question, had it been asked at that point, where are the carriers, would have been that none of them were deployed, not a single one. For the first time since World War II, the United States had no carriers deployed anywhere, not in the Persian Gulf, not in the Mediterranean, none in the Western Pacific. There is a gap in our global carrier presence, and there is a gap in our fleet, and they come from years of complacency, but also they come from a different set of facts that we're faced with, a different set of challenges that we are faced with in our quest to make our presence known and to protect our national security interest on the open seas. We have ignored the great naval competition taking place elsewhere and the fact that it is accelerating. We've taken our Navy and our sailors and Marines for granted. Simply put, the Navy we have today is too small. We cannot accomplish the critical missions we have by preserving the status quo. Right now, we have 277 ships, and we need to get to 355 ships. That was reiterated today by the Chief of Naval Operations and the Secretary of the Navy in a hearing before the full Armed Services Committee. Today, I'd like to reiterate to my colleagues and to the American people what the Navy does for America and why the current fleet is too small to meet current and emerging challenges. First, the global presence of the Navy ship matters to American prosperity, to the quality of life of Americans. 90% of global trade is seaborne. Maritime traffic has increased by 400% over the past quarter century. In addition to commerce, nearly all intercontinental telecommunications transit via a web of undersea cables. Undersea cables are responsible for nearly all of our intercontinental telecommunications. A strong Navy deters aggressive behavior and reassures our allies as the nation's first-on-the-scene force. A strong Navy can help keep bad situations from spiraling out of control and getting worse. For example, the President recently dispatched multiple carrier strike groups to the Sea of Japan following North Korea's missile tests. The President asked where the carriers were, and he dispatched them to a place of crisis. A mix of ships gives our Commander-in-Chief a range of military options, and their deployment to areas of instability can send a message of resolve to our friends and foes alike. Third, if deterrence fails, our naval forces can provide a decisive response to aggression. Surface ships, submarines, and the aircraft on the carriers can launch missile strikes, control air and sea traffic, and intercept missile threats. Recent U.S. action in Syria is a good example, as the President knows. Using destroyers in the Mediterranean, the Commander-in-Chief delivered precision strikes against Syrian airfields. He enforced the red line against outlawed chemical weapons, and President Assad has not crossed that red line again. Accomplishing these missions as the nation's sentinel and first responder requires a big Navy. Admiral John Richardson, the Chief of Naval Operations, put it best in his future Navy white paper released last month. He said, and I quote, "Numbers matter. The number of ships in the Navy's fleet determines where we can be, and being there is a key to naval power," unquote. Again, the current fleet, about 277 ships, is way too small. It is important to remember that not all ships are deployed or deployable. In fact, only about 100 ships are currently deployed out of the 277. The other two-thirds are undergoing heavy maintenance, routine sustainment, or training to deploy. The Navy recently validated its requirement for 355 ships, a 47-ship increase over the previous requirement. The lack of ships has created coverage gaps all over the world, and I'll give you two examples, Mr. President. First, the commander of Pacific Command, Admiral Harry Harris, recently told Congress he has only half the submarines he needs. Admiral Harris is responsible for deterring China and North Korea, but he's missing half of the submarines he needs. Closer to home, the commander of Southern Command, Admiral Kirk Tidd, has zero Navy ships permanently assigned to his area of operations. These are just two of the many alarming instances where the lack of ships is having major consequences. While we watch our edge erode, America's real and potential adversaries are building the size and capability of their fleets. They are on the field competing, while in America, many of our players are still in the locker room. China is building a modern Navy capable of projecting global power. China is modernizing every type of ship and submarine in its fleet. China commissioned 18 ships last year. In April, China launched its first domestically built carrier and plans to build at least 6 more carriers. By 2030, China will have more than twice as many attack submarines and 4 times as many small surface ships as the United States. Beijing is developing its first overseas naval base in the Horn of Africa. China's naval buildup may attempt to push the United States further out of the Western Pacific, away from critical trade choke points and our allies in South Korea and Japan. And I would call the attention of members to the poster that I have, and I hope it's printed large enough for you to see, Mr. President, in terms of 5 types of ships. It compares where we were in 2000, where we are today, and where we're projected to be if current trends continue. So, for example, on the farthest column, in attack submarines, and the black portion of each circle represents China's capability, and the blue represents our capability in the United States of America. In 2000, it was 64 to 55 in favor of the Chinese. In 2016, as you can see, 56 to 57. But under current projections, by the year 2030, when it comes to attack submarines, the Chinese will have 87 and the United States will have only 42, Mr. President. A disturbing trend which the Navy would like to reverse if we have the ability and the wisdom to give them the requirement that they have said they need. With regard to ballistic missile submarines, in 2000, quite a mismatch. Only 1 for China as compared to 18 for the United States. Then only last year, 4 for China and 14 for the United States Navy, and then projected in 2030, and really that's only 13 short years, hard to believe, there will be more Chinese ballistic missile submarines than American ballistic missile submarines, unless we take the Navy's requirement to heart and take action beginning this year to rectify that situation. With regard to small surface ships, as you can see, a 79 to 62 advantage in sheer numbers in 2000, a 103 to 23 advantage of the Chinese in 2016, and in 2030, still a mismatch in terms of numbers of 123 small surface ships compared to only 40 for the United States of America. With large surface ships, it was 20 to 79, then 19 to 84. By the year 2030, as you can see, the Chinese are projected to have 34 large surface ships. And with regard